Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. Background: the P-40's roots date back as far as 1924, with the origin of the famed Curtiss Hawk fighters, which became the best all-around U.S. pursuit aircraft. In 1933, after the Curtiss Model 66 lost to the Boeing P-26 during a U.S. Army Air Corps fly-off, Curtiss was determined to retain its dominance as an Air Corps contractor and hired Donovan R. Berlin as its new chief engineer. Berlin had previously worked at Douglas and Northrop, two firms that had been at the cutting edge of aircraft design. The result was the Model 75. It originally was rejected in favor of the Seversky P-35, but in 1937, Curtiss was awarded a contract for 210 Model 75s, designated P-36As, which was the largest U.S. military airplane order since the First World War. Subscribe to our channel and get notification when we release new episodes. Worldwide fighter aircraft designs matured rapidly during the late 1930s, and it was soon obvious that the P-36 was no match for newer European designs. High-altitude performance in particular became a priceless commodity. Berlin attempted to improve the P-36 by redesigning it to accommodate a turbo-supercharged Allison V17-1011 inline liquid-cooled engine. The new aircraft was designated the XP-37, but proved unpopular with pilots. The turbo-supercharger was not reliable, and Berlin had placed the cockpit too far back on the fuselage, restricting the view to the front of the fighter. Nonetheless, when the engine was not giving trouble, the more streamlined XP-37 was much faster than the P-36. Curtiss tried again in 1938. Berlin had modified another P-36 with a new Allison V17-19 engine. It was designated the XP-40 and first flew on October 14, 1938. The XP-40 looked promising, and Curtiss offered it to Army Air Corps leaders who evaluated the airplane at Wright Field, Ohio in 1939, along with several other fighter proposals. The XP-40 had the advantage of being based on an existing fighter design that was already on the production line. That meant Curtiss could put the P-40 into production with a minimum of delay and at the highly competitive price of $24,566.60 apiece. On April 26, 1939, Curtiss was awarded a contract for 524 P-40s, once again the largest order for fighter planes placed by the Army since 1918. Armament and armor. The P-40 prototype was armed with one 50 caliber and one 30 caliber machine gun, the standard Air Corps fighter armament during the 1930s, but the production model was armed with two 50 caliber machine guns. In keeping with President Franklin D. Roosevelt's policy of making the latest American military hardware available to the Allies, 140 of the original batch of P-40s were diverted to France. They were armed with one 50 caliber machine gun in the fuselage and four 7.5 millimeter guns in the wings. However, none of those P-40s was delivered by the time France capitulated. Instead, the export P-40s were delivered to the British Royal Air Force, or RAF, and became known as the Tomahawk Mark I. As a result of European combat experience, Curtiss installed armor in the P-40 and increased its armament, adding a 30 caliber machine gun in each wing. The improved fighter was called the P-40B by the Americans and Tomahawk Mark II by the British. The next model, known as the P-40C, also had self-sealing fuel tanks and yet another 30 caliber machine gun in each wing. First flown in April 1941, the P-40C was considered the first truly combat-ready version of the P-40 line. A price had been paid for the necessary improvements, however. The aircraft's gross weight had increased from 7,215 to 8,058 pounds, an increase of 843 pounds or approximately 11%, with no increase in engine power. The P-40C's rate of climb suffered. It was less maneuverable, and its maximum speed fell to 340 miles per hour. By comparison, the Messerschmitt Me-109E, used by the Luftwaffe in 1941, weighed only 6,100 pounds and had a top speed of 360 miles per hour. Air Chief Marshal Sir Kenneth Cross, who served in the RAF's Desert Air Force, recalled that the Tomahawk was beautifully built. but short on performance compared to the Messerschmitt 109F and G. Early combat. When the United States declared war, P-40s equipped many of the Army Air Corps' frontline fighter units. The plucky fighter eventually saw combat in almost every theater of operations, being most effective in the China-Burma-India CBI theater. The CBI group that gained the most notoriety of the entire war, and that remains to this day synonymous with the P-40, was the American Volunteer Group, or the Flying Tigers. The unit was organized after the Chinese gave former U.S. Army Air Corps Captain Claire Lee Chennault almost $9 million in 1940 to buy aircraft and recruit pilots to fly against the Japanese. The money from China diverted an order placed by the RAF for 100 P-40B Tomahawks, but buying airplanes was only one important step in creating a fighting air unit. Trained pilots were needed, and quickly, as tensions across the Pacific escalated. On April 15, 1941, President Roosevelt quietly signed an executive order permitting Chennault to recruit directly from the ranks of American military reserve pilots. Within a few months, 350 flyers joined from pursuit, fighter, bomber, and patrol squadrons. In all, about half the pilots in the Flying Tigers came from the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps, while the Army Air Corps supplied one-third. Factory test pilots at Bell, Consolidated, and other companies and commercial airline pilots filled the remaining slots. The Flying Tigers were the first real opposition the Japanese military encountered. In less than 7 months of action, American Volunteer Group pilots destroyed about 115 Japanese aircraft and lost only 11 planes in air-to-air combat. 18 RAF, 4 Royal Canadian Air Force, 3 South African Air Force, and 2 Royal Australian Air Force squadrons serving with RAF formations used P-40s. Testing showed the aircraft did not have the performance needed for use in Northwest Europe at high altitude due to the service ceiling limitation. Spitfires used in the theater operated at heights around 30,000 feet, while the P-40's Allison engine, with its single-stage low-altitude rated supercharger, worked best at 15,000 feet or lower. Air Ministry deemed the P-40 unsuitable for the theater. UK P-40 squadrons from mid-1942 re-equipped with aircraft such as Mustangs. North Africa. The Tomahawk was superseded in North Africa by the more powerful Kitty Hawk types from early 1942, though some Tomahawks remained in service until 1943. Kitty Hawks included many improvements and were the Desert Air Force's air superiority fighter for the critical first few months of 1942, until tropicalized Spitfires were available. Tomahawks and Kitty Hawks bore the brunt of Luftwaffe and Italian Regia Aeronautica fighter attacks during the North African campaign. The P-40s were considered superior to the Hurricane, which they replaced as the primary fighter of the Desert Air Force. The gradual replacement of Hurricanes by the Tomahawks and Kitty Hawks led to the Luftwaffe accelerating retirement of the Bf-109E and introducing the newer Bf-109F. These were to be flown by the veteran pilots of elite Luftwaffe units in North Africa. The P-40 was generally considered roughly equal or slightly superior to the Bf-109 at low altitude, but inferior at high altitude, particularly against the Bf-109F. Most air combat in North Africa took place well below 16,000 feet, negating much of the Bf-109 superiority. The P-40 usually had an advantage over the Bf-109 in horizontal maneuvers, turning, dive speed, and structural strength, and was roughly equal in firepower, but was slightly inferior in speed and outclassed in rate of climb and operational ceiling. From May 26, 1942, Kitty Hawk units operated primarily as fighter bomber units, giving rise to the nickname Kitty Bomber. As a result of this change in role, and because P-40 squadrons were frequently used in bomber escort and close air support missions, they suffered relatively high losses. Many Desert Air Force P-40 pilots were caught flying low and slow by marauding Bf-109s. The highest-scoring P-40 ace, Clive Caldwell of the Royal Australian Air Force, who claimed 22 of his 28 kills in the type, said that the P-40 had almost no vices, but was a little difficult to control in terminal velocity. The P-40 had one of the fastest maximum dive speeds of any fighter of the early war period, and good high-speed handling. Pacific Theater. A total of 15 U.S. Army Air Force pursuit fighter groups, along with other pursuit fighter squadrons, and a few tactical reconnaissance units operated the P-40 from 1941 to 1945. The P-40 was the main U.S. Army Air Force fighter in the Southwest Pacific and Pacific Ocean theaters during 1941 and 42. At Pearl Harbor and in the Philippines, P-40 squadrons suffered crippling losses on the ground and in the air to Japanese fighters. During the attack on Pearl Harbor, most U.S. Army Air Force fighters were P-40Bs, most of which were destroyed. However, a few P-40s managed to get in the air and shoot down several Japanese aircraft. The only surviving airworthy American fighter from the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor is displayed at the American Heritage Museum. Contrary to conventional wisdom, with sufficient altitude, the P-40 could turn with the A6M0 and other Japanese fighters using a combination of a nose-down vertical turn with a bank turn, a technique known as a low yo-yo. Royal Australian Air Force Kitty Hawks played a crucial role in the Southwest Pacific Theater. They fought on the front line as fighters during the critical early years of the Pacific War, and the durability and bomb-carrying abilities, 1,000 pounds, of the P-40 also made it ideal for the ground attack role. A total of 13 Royal Canadian Air Force units operated the P-40 in the Northwest European or Alaskan theaters. A total of 301 P-40s were allocated to the Royal New Zealand Air Force under Lend-Lease for use in the Pacific Theater, though 4 of these were lost in transit. Against the Germans. On August 14, 1942, the first confirmed victory by a U.S. Army Air Force unit over a German aircraft in World War II was achieved by a P-40C pilot, Second Lieutenant Joseph D. Schaefer of the 33rd Fighter Squadron, intercepted a Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor maritime patrol aircraft that overflew his base at Reykjavik, Iceland. On April 18, 1943, decoded ultra signals revealed a plan for a large formation of Junkers Ju-52 transports to cross the Mediterranean, escorted by German and Italian fighters. Between 1630 and 1830 hours, all wings of the 57th Fighter Group were engaged in an intensive effort against the enemy air transports. The group claimed 58 Ju-52s, 14 Bf-109s, and 2 Bf-110s destroyed, with several probables and damaged. From 20 to 40 of the Axis aircraft landed on the beaches around Cap Bon to avoid being shot down. 6 Allied fighters were lost, 5 of them P-40s. It was called the Palm Sunday Massacre. On April 22nd, in Operation Flax, a similar force of P-40s attacked a formation of 14 Messerschmitt Me-323 giant 6-engine transports covered by 7 Bf-109s. All the transports were shot down for a loss of 3 P-40s. A famous African-American unit, the Tuskegee Airmen, or Red Tails, flew P-40s in stateside training and for their initial 8 months in the Mediterranean theater of operations. On June 9, 1943, over Pantelleria, Italy, they became the first African-American fighter pilots to engage enemy aircraft. In all, 23 U.S. pilots became aces in the Mediterranean theater of operations in the P-40, most of them during the first half of 1943. The Soviet Voyeno-Vostochny Sily military air forces and Morskaya Avitsia Naval Air Service also referred to P-40s as Tomahawks and Kitty Hawks. In fact, the Curtiss P-40 Tomahawk Kitty Hawk was the first Allied fighter supplied to the USSR under the Lend-Lease Agreement. In January 1942, some 198 aircraft sorties were flown and 11 aerial engagements were conducted, in which 5 Bf-109s, 1 Ju-88, and 1 HE-111 were downed. These statistics reveal a surprising fact. It turns out that the Tomahawk was fully capable of successful air combat with a Bf-109. The reports of pilots about the circumstances of the engagements confirm this fact. The P-40 saw the most frontline use in Soviet hands in 1942 and early 1943. The USSR received 2,425 P-40s from 1941 to 1944. The P-40 was used by over 24 countries during and after the war. The P-40 was used by Brazil, Egypt, Finland, and Turkey. The last P-40s in military service, used by the Brazilian Air Force, were retired in 1954. In the hands of a skilled pilot, The P-40 could exceed its limitations and could outmaneuver and outfight anything in the sky, said Flying Tiger ace David L. Tex Hill in a 2005 interview. It was sturdy and handled well, except in a spin, but you never piloted a P-40 without wishing you had something a little better. If you like these types of videos, subscribe to our channel and get notification when we release new episodes. For more interesting military history content, check out our video library.